Hello, everyone, and welcome to our series on tips and tricks for Azure Backup. I am Aruna Somendra from the Microsoft Azure Backup product team, and in this episode, I will show you how you can fix backup issues for network lockdown Azure IaaS VMs using service tags. Azure Backup requires the backup extension on the IaaS virtual machine to be able to communicate with Azure Storage for managing the VM snapshots. Without this connectivity, the virtual machine's HTTP requests timeout and the backup operation fails. In this episode, we will show you how you can add specific outbound rules using service tags within your NSGs so that your VM continues to remain secure while enabling Azure Backup to interact with the required Azure storage to successfully create the backups. In this example, I have an IaaS virtual machine prod VM1 that has its network configurations through an NSG prod VM1-NSG. For simulating a network configuration that locks down outbound access, I have added an outbound port rule, deny all, that is blocking all outbound access on any protocol from any source for this virtual machine. When I navigate into such a virtual machine's backup properties, which can be accessed from the IaaS VM blade itself, I see the backup details for this VM show up, and I see a banner that tells me the pre-check status is shown to be critical. When I click on this banner, I see details that the reason the backups are failing is because of network connectivity issues from this virtual machine to Azure storage. It also gives me details on what actions to take to fix it. To fix this, we need to add a rule to enable access to the Azure Storage IP where the backups will be written. Since Azure Backup only requires outbound access, we need to create a new outbound rule. Also, in this example, since the deny all policy is at a priority 1000, we will have to create the new rule with a priority lesser than 1000 so that it gets processed first. In this example, my VM and Vault are in the Japan East region, so we will create a new outbound rule in the NSG for the VM to enable access to Azure storage in the Japan East region. Choosing advanced settings enables us to specify granular configuration. Choose virtual network as the source and allow access from any port by specifying asterisks for the source port ranges. Specifying an outbound port rule to Azure endpoints is now made easier with service tags, so you don't need to remember or update the IP list. In this example, we will give storage.japaneast as the service destination, since this is where the VM and the vault reside. The destination port to be chosen is the port used for accessing disk blobs. The default is HTTPS using port 443, and that is what we will enter here. If your deployment has enabled HTTP with port 80 access, you will need to add that port here. The protocol Azure Backup uses is TCP, and that is what we will choose for the protocol. Since we need to ensure that this rule is processed before all the other rules, we will choose a priority less than 1000. The action enables is defaulted to allow, and we will let that remain. Give a name to the outbound rule. I choose to call it Azure Backup Allowed. And click OK. By adding this new rule to enable outbound access to Azure storage, the NSG continues to prevent unauthorized access while still allowing Azure Backup to communicate to Azure storage. Note that this NSG rule can be applied to multiple virtual machines that need to have the same networking configuration and yet allow Azure Backup. Now that the new outbound rule is created, we can trigger backup again and validate that it'll work this time. Backup is triggered again from the backup details blade of the virtual machine. The pre-check status banner is based on the success of the previous backup and will show up as critical until the next successful backup. If we enable backup now, the backup will go through successfully and we can see an increase in the count of the recovery points. When the backup completes, the backup detail blades shows the restore point count increased and the pre-check status being passed. The lockdown IaaS virtual machine is now set up to have successful backups by using an outbound rule for Azure Backup without compromising the network security of the virtual machine. That's our tip for this session. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for more tips and tricks in every episode.